Is Mariah Carey a chord genius? I'm going to look at All I Want for Christmas Is You, which is Mariah Carey's massive hit. Apparently earns her £1 million a year. Isn't that amazing? Or a day or something crazy. And we're going to look at those chords. I'm going to look at all of the chords, go through them one by one. So to help you understand what's going on in that chord theory, so you can learn what's happening, and ideally you might be able to start using some of those chords in your own songwriting. Before I start, this song is all about tension and release. That's what it is for me anyway. And if you listen to the song, as we work through it today, you'll see that some of the chords create a wonderful tension that is then resolved in either the next chord or a couple of chords down the line. And that is one of the reasons this song is so amazing, and it combines beautifully with an amazing melody. So I believe Mariah Carey wrote the melody and Walter Afasanieff, I can't say his name properly, wrote the chords. So it may well actually be that Walter is the chord genius, but together they've crafted one of the most timeless songs. It kind of feels and sounds like it could have been written in the 60s, or it could have been written last year, and it works every single year. So the song is in the key of G major, which means it has one F sharp and the rest are all the white notes on the keyboard. So what I'll also do is, if any notes that aren't in the G major scale come into a chord, I'll explain them. And they're one of the reasons why this song introduces the tension. It's when they bring in those non-diatonic notes into the music. So we start with G major. Loads of songs start with this. It's the root chord. It's chord number 1, but it sounds like home, right? So, and that's a good place to start if you're trying to create a happy Christmas song. Over the G major chord, the melody goes, I don't want a lot. So it's like an arpeggio, and it beautifully covers with that G. And then that is an ascending melody, which then leads to the second chord, which is G over B, or it's also called G first inversion. Inversions are where basically you change the root note, the bottom note of the chord. If you imagine on a piano, you're playing a G with the G major chord on your right hand. If you just move that G up to B, that would be a first inversion. And that's actually what is happening here. So it's a G major or a G major first inversion, or G over B. This works really well because actually the melody has moved up. I don't want a lot for Christmas. And over the lot for Christmas, where it's coming down, the bottom note has moved up. So you've got kind of the whole song feels like it's kind of constrained in. Now also, G over B, those sorts of first inversion chords of the root, have a natural tension to them. They're not home. So if you listen to the difference between this chord, G, and then this chord, G over B, you can hear that the first chord, the G, sounds like it's home. The second chord sounds like it's going somewhere. It's left home. So that's a natural tension. That's the first point of tension I want to reflect on. Then the resolution of that tension is moving to the next chord. So we move in the root note from a B to a C. So we're now in a C major chord. So that is the first point of tension and release. So we've gone from G to G over B and then to C, and that creates that lovely release. It adds a brightness, a touch of lift, and the melody rises, and there's a kind of repeat of the melody, which is basically a repeat of the first melodic line. So that's quite satisfying from a melodic perspective. You're having a repeated theme, but the chord has changed. And again, we've got that resolution. Now we're going to hit our first non-G major note in the next chord. So again, the fourth chord is a C minor first inversion. So now we're going away from the C major to the C minor, and we're moving the root note up to E flat. Check it out. So what this does, this is really powerful. In lots of music, you will find that the fourth chord goes from major to minor to create that kind of almost sadness or reflective sound. And in this exact case here, we've also repeated the theme from the first two chords, where we've taken the root note and moved it up a third. We're actually got a third inversion of the minor C minor, so it kind of works, but it's a similar pattern. The bass has moved up a third and then up a third again, while the melody has stayed quite similar. So there's a lot going on here, but the melody being so similar, whilst the chords change underneath them, and change to a minor sort of vibe. That's why this song doesn't feel like weird. You've got an E flat now, which isn't in the G major scale, and that E flat causes this tension to come into the chord, and it's that fourth minor chord, which is a beautiful thing to do, but it creates a sadness feel. So that's great again for a festive song, for a Christmas song. Often the ones that really get me are the ones that combine the kind of happiness of Christmas, but also the sadness and reflection of the year, like the Pogues. and that really gets me. And you'll notice as well that Mariah Carey even sings the E flat in her melody. So again, we're really honing in on that chord. Now then we move down. So far the bass has been moving up in thirds in a kind of bluesy vibe. And now we go from the E flat to a D. So it moves down to a D, but we actually have a G major over a D. So that G major over a D is the second inversion of G major. So we've already had the kind of root G major, we've had the first inversion, and now we've got the second inversion. And again, listen to what it sounds like. The second inversion of G major feels like it's really tense. It's way more tense than the first inversion, and it feels like we're going somewhere. We're lost. We're not where we need to be. But it sounds like you know where home is. Anyway, that's why I think I'm a bit weird about chords. I often think of them like colours. So that works really well because it creates a real sense of tension in going somewhere. It wants you to go somewhere. It wants the listener to go somewhere. Okay, so you could use a D major here rather than the G over D. So that's the dominant. So it's kind of the chord 5. So you'll often see it written down as a 5 when you're looking at chord notation. And the dominant in normal chord theory is you're leading you back to the root. So you'll normally in G major, you'd play a D major, and that feels like you want to get back to a G major. So in this instant, we've switched from the D major to a G over D. So it's not like a dominant feels like a kind of natural, we're going home, that's fine. But this is actually a G over the dominant note, and it feels like we're a bit lost. And again, this is another piece of tension that's been created in this song. And we're going to get even more tense in a second because we move from G major over D to the next chord, which is B7. So this chord is out of nowhere. It also has a D sharp in it, which, funnily enough, is the E flat from the C minor chord. So we've got the same note we've heard already. So again, it doesn't feel... So the chord's out of nowhere. B major 7 is out of nowhere, but it actually fits in with the vibe because we've already heard that note already and she's even sung that note in the melody. So this is a B major 7. Now, this is quite a classic chord to have in a normal G major scale. So it's the third note. So B is the third note of G. If you turn that into a major, that then becomes the dominant chord of E minor. So it's the fifth chord of the E minor scale. And E minor is the relative minor of G major. So again, getting into a bit of chord theory here, but in the scale of G major, E minor is the natural minor chord that you can play around with. And it also sounds a bit like home, the kind of sad home of G major. So if you bring in B major 7, it leads you, it's the dominant, it leads you to E minor. So we've had the tension from G over D, and then we move into B7, which creates a kind of, it's a dominant, so it's less tense in some respects, but it's a new vibe, and it leads us through to E minor. So if you're writing a song, let's say in G major, and you want to transition to the relative minor, it's quite a classic thing you can do to bring in a B major or a B major 7, and that will lead you to the relative minor E minor. So that's a good trick you can use. If you're a bit lost and your chords are sounding boring and you're in a major vibe, bang out the third chord, B, and then make it a major. It would normally be a minor in the diatonic scale. So make it a major, and that will lead you to the relative minor. Sounds really good. So you can try that. And again, it's another example of tension. It's a new chord. It's coming in, and it drives us to the E minor beautifully. So now we're kind of home. We've got to E minor. E minor is the relative minor of G major. It's the sixth chord, and the sixth chord in a major scale is normally the minor. And again, as I said earlier, that's your relative minor. It's kind of your minor home for the chord sequence, as I like to think about it. It's kind of like a reflective quality, introspective, and it's kind of accepting, you know, where we are in this beautiful Christmas song. Now we're here, we're home, we're at E minor. We've got to finish this song. And Walter and Mariah have created an absolutely gorgeous, almost jazz-like turnaround with some chords that flow from one to the other. So I'm going to go through them, but this is something you can go and try at home. Go and try and play these chords in order. These will get you from an E minor place in your chord sequence back to the beginning being in major. So you can try these yourself, but they are absolutely beautiful. So we're in E minor. The next chord is C minor over E flat. Now listen to this. It's moving from the E chromatically down 1 to E flat. So it kind of, again, is that sort of tension. Now this, I see this as like a passing chord. In jazz, passing chords are used to go from one chord to another. And they often kind of are almost a bit out of cycle, and they can be almost any note sometimes. You can almost play random notes on the way from one chord to another. These aren't random, but they kind of feel like they're chromatically moving from one to the other. So we go from E minor to C minor over E flat, followed again by our favorite G major second inversion, so the D in the root note. And again, so we've moved from a kind of sad place, moved back round to that tense G major second inversion, which again feels like it should be home, but it feels like we're not. Okay, so we move from a G major second inversion, and then we go up to an E major 7. So we've had E minor already. We're now into the major territory, E major, with a G sharp. So that's not, again, another note that's not in the diatonic scale of G major. Now what this is a quite classic jazzy turnaround. So I've got to go a little bit into the circle of fifths here. Real quick, G is 1, D is 5. Any note that's the fifth of another note wants to lead you back. So check this out. If I go A, B, C, D, E. E is the fifth note of A. So the next chord we're playing here is E7. And as I said, that wants to lead you back to A. So it's a circle of fifths. So we're trying to get ourselves back to G major. E is the fifth chord of A is the fifth chord of D, and D is the fifth chord of G. So anyway, I've kind of gone, I'm not sure I've explained that very well, but the turnaround at the end is like this. E7 to A minor to D7 to G major. Now that's the circle of fifths. Now there is one change in here that I wanted to flag to you, the final change I wanted to say, which is the final piece of absolutely beautiful tension. I've just described to you the circle of fifths, which suggests we should have a D major 7 in here to lead us back to G. But listen to this chord here. It's a D in the root note, so it's kind of got the sense and the kind of centering of D major, but we've got a C minor chord above it. And again, this is kind of like a diminished, augmented sort of vibe. I don't actually know what this chord is called, but it's certainly a D with a C minor over the top. And now listen to the circle of fifths with that chord in now. Now check this out. So can you hear that? What a beautiful, jazzy circle of fifths turnaround that's really complicated with loads of stuff going into it. But we've now moved beautifully back from our E minor home root into a circle of fifths to bring us back to G major. So there's loads in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments on the chords that I've said, you might have different names for them. I'm not like the #1 person in the world for naming chords. I kind of know how they sound. I know how they make me feel. I hope they've made you feel the same way. And I hope there's lots in here for you to get into and understand. So if you like this, check out my other videos on this channel. I'm also an independent artist myself, releasing. Come and check me out. Give me a follow on Spotify or YouTube. It'd be great to see you there. Thanks.